The air at Bagram Forward Operating Base Ambaraya tasted of dust and kerosene. It was a fine grit that settled on everything, a permanent sandy film that covered the sleek fuselages of the F-35 Lightnings and the dull battle-gray skin of Captain Anya Rostova's A-10 Thunderbolt II. Her jet, which she privately called Hilda, looked less like a weapon of the 21st century and more like a relic forged from stubbornness and pig iron. It didn't slice through the air, it brutalized it into submission. Anya loved it for that very reason. She moved around the aircraft with a practiced, almost reverent grace. Her pre-flight check was a silent liturgy. Her gloved fingers traced the rivets along the wing's leading edge, felt for imperfections on the fan blades of the twin General Electric engines, and gently patted the nose just below the painted shark's teeth that snarled at a world that had tried to render it obsolete. The other pilots, the ones with pressure-fit G-suits and helmets that cost more than her car, saw a flying tank. Anya saw a guardian. They heard a discordant roar. She heard a promise. The F-35 pilots called their jets panthers or strikers. The A-10 pilots had only one name for their craft, the Warthog. It was an ugly name for an ugly plane, and they wore the moniker with a quiet pride that bordered on defiance. In the mess hall, the fighter jocks would talk of sensor fusion stealth profiles and beyond visual range engagements. They spoke of war as a clean digital affair conducted from 30,000 feet. Anya and her small, shrinking squadron would sit apart, their conversation revolving around hydraulic pressures, the ballistics of 30mm depleted uranium rounds, and the look in a soldier's eyes when he sees the A-10's unmistakable silhouette appearing over a ridge. They spoke of war as a muddy, intimate, and terrible thing. Her ground crew chief, a grizzled master sergeant named Elias, met her under the massive GAU-8 Avenger cannon that was the soul of the aircraft. It was less a gun mounted on a plane and more a plane built around a gun. "She's ready for you, Captain." Elias set his voice a low rumble. He didn't smile often, but when he looked at the A-10, there was a warmth in his eyes. "Loaded the HEI. Figured you might need to make a statement. High explosive incendiary. Not the armor-piercing rounds. For softer targets. For making a point." Anya nodded, a small, grateful smile touching her lips. "A statement is all we seem to make these days, Elias." Her gaze drifted across the flight line to the sterile hangars where the F-35s were being prepped. A visiting command delegation was scheduled to arrive, and the base was putting on its best face. That face was sleek, fast, and expensive. It was not the scarred, pugnacious face of a Warthog. Colonel Marcus Richter was the face of that new philosophy. He was a command officer, not a pilot, a man who saw the battlefield as a set of variables to be managed by superior data. Anya had met him once during a squadron review. He had walked past her A-10 with a cursory glance, his eyes already seeking the fifth-generation fighters further down the line. He'd asked her about the A-10's data link capabilities, its integration with the F-35's sensor network. He hadn't asked her what it felt like to fly below a ridgeline, the trees close enough to touch, with a platoon of terrified soldiers trusting you to tell the difference between their foxhole and the enemy's. He saw the machine, not the mission. She swung herself up the ladder and settled into the cockpit. It wasn't the glass and touchscreen interface of a modern jet. It was a cluttered office of analog dials, worn switches, and circuit breakers. The entire cockpit was a titanium bathtub, designed to protect the pilot from ground fire. It felt less like a cockpit and more like an armored womb. Here she was safe. Here she had purpose. She began the startup sequence, the methodical flicking of switches, a familiar comfort. The auxiliary power unit whined to life, and the instruments flickered on, bathing her face in a soft green glow. Through the canopy, she watched the polished boots of the command delegation striding towards the F-35 hangar. Colonel Richter was at the front, pointing, explaining, shaping the narrative of modern air power. He never once looked her way. Anya closed her eyes for a moment, the low hum of the aircraft vibrating through her seat. They could have their clean, sanitized war. They could have their battles fought by algorithms and stealth. She knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that when the data streams failed and the satellites were blind, when the war was no longer a matter of pixels on a screen, but of blood in the dirt, they would look to the sky. And she and her ugly, beautiful beast would be there. The high-pitched whine of an F-35 taxiing for a demonstration flight sliced through the air as Colonel Richter and his entourage finally made their way toward the A-10s. It felt less like a planned stop and more like an obligation, a box to be checked on their tour of the base's assets. Anya stood at a respectful distance from Hilda, hands clasped behind her back. Elias stood beside her, his arms crossed, his posture that of a man guarding a sacred site from tourists. Richter stopped, his polished boots crunching on the loose gravel. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, scanned the A-10 not with a pilot's appreciation, but with an analyst's cold calculation. He took in the bulky engines, the straight, broad wings, the pockmarks and grease stains that spoke of countless hours of service. He saw wear and tear where Anya saw experience. "Captain Rostova," he said, his voice crisp and devoid of warmth. He did not offer a handshake. "I've been reviewing the sortie rates for your squadron. Impressive availability for such a vintage airframe." The word vintage hung in the air, a carefully chosen insult wrapped in a compliment. "She's a reliable aircraft, sir." Anya replied, her tone even. "Built to last, built to take a hit and keep flying." Indeed," Richter mused, tapping a finger against his chin. "But in a modern integrated battle space, survivability isn't just about armor. It's about not being seen at all. What are your countermeasures against peer-level surface-to-air threats? How does your platform contribute to the network when its data link is, shall we say, rudimentary compared to the F-35's sensor fusion?" He spoke of the war as if it were a complex equation. He was searching for a variable he could slot into his models. The A-10, with its analog heart, refused to be quantified so easily. "Our primary countermeasure, sir, is the terrain. We fly low enough that the planet itself defeats the enemy's radar," Anya explained calmly. "And we contribute to the network by speaking directly to the soldiers on the ground. We become their eyes and their shield. Sometimes the most effective data link is a human voice." A faint, dismissive smile played on Richter's lips. "A romantic notion, Captain. But ground troops need support that is survivable and persistent. Sending a blunt instrument like this into a high-threat environment is a risk I'm not willing to take with my men." He turned to his aide. "Make a note. We need to reassess the utility of this squadron's deployment." He gave the A-10 one last look. A look one might give a museum piece, and then moved on. The delegation followed their attention, already shifting back to the promise of stealth and speed. Anya remained still, the desert wind whipping a loose strand of hair across her face. A blunt instrument. That's all he saw. He couldn't see the lives this blunt instrument had saved. Later that day, the feeling of being an afterthought was codified in the main briefing room. The air was cool, the scent of antiseptic cleaner sharp. It was a room of screens and data, the domain of men like Richter. He stood before a massive tactical display outlining Operation Serpent's Eye. The mission was for a 12-man Special Forces team, call sign Talon 3, to infiltrate deep into the Corin Valley, to confirm the location of a sophisticated new enemy radar system. Air superiority and overwatch will be maintained by 2 flights of F-35's call signs, Ghost 1 and Ghost 2. Richter announced his laser pointer circling the valley on the digital map. They will provide real-time ISR and be on station for any contingency. Anya watched her posture perfect her face, betraying no emotion. Her Squadron Havoc flight was mentioned last. Shatters, Havoc flight, Richter said, moving the pointer to a grid square dozens of miles away from the primary objective over a desolate stretch of desert. You will conduct an armed reconnaissance patrol along Route Jupiter. Standard contingency mission. Maintain station and report any activity. You are to avoid any engagement unless directly fired upon. It was the military equivalent of being told to go sit in the corner. Route Jupiter was a ghost road used by nothing but sandstorms. The assignment was a formality, a way to log flight hours while keeping the blunt instruments far away from his delicate, high-stakes operation. Around her, the F-35 pilots absorbed their orders with quiet intensity. They were the tip of the spear. Anya and her wingman were being sent to polish the shaft. The briefing ended. As the room emptied, Anya remained in her seat for a moment, staring at the map. The Corin Valley was a jagged scar of rock and shadow, a perfect place for an ambush, a terrible place to be caught in the open. She felt the familiar cold knot of apprehension in her stomach, a feeling born of experience. It was a premonition she couldn't voice, an instinct that had no place in Colonel Richter's clean digital war. She had been dismissed, and with her, the unique, brutal wisdom her Warthog represented. The stars were still sharp against the ink-black sky when Anya arrived on the flight line. The air was cold, carrying a deceptive stillness before the orchestrated chaos of the morning's launch. Across the tarmac, floodlights illuminated the sleek, angular shapes of the F-35s. Ground crews moved around them with a quiet, focused urgency, their movements precise and economical. A C-130 was already warming its engines, preparing to carry Talon 3 to their insertion point. The entire base was a coiled spring, and the energy was focused on one thing: Operation Serpent's Eye. Anya walked past it, all her boots, leaving faint prints in the dusty asphalt until she reached the solitary shape of Hilda. In the pre-dawn gloom, the Warthog looked even more like a creature from another era, its heavy form absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. Elias was already there, running a diagnostic check on the targeting pod. He gave her a simple nod, the unspoken acknowledgement of 2 professionals who didn't need words for their work. She began her walk around the ritual, a familiar anchor in the swirling currents of the morning. But today, something felt different. Her movements were just as precise, her checks just as thorough, yet her mind was miles away, hovering over the treacherous terrain of the Corin Valley. As her gloved hand rested on the cool metal of the wing, she wasn't thinking about the empty desert of Route Jupiter. She was picturing the deep ravines and blind corners from the mission briefing map. She saw the goat tracks that crisscrossed the mountains, perfect channels for an ambush invisible from 30,000 feet. Richter's plan was elegant, a perfect construct of data and technology. But war wasn't elegant. War was messy, and it lived in the shadows the satellites couldn't pierce. A premonition, cold and heavy as lead, settled in her gut. It was an instinct honed over 1,000 flight hours, a primal sense of danger that no algorithm could replicate. The plan was too perfect, and in her experience, perfect plans were the first to break. "It looks like we drew the short straw again, boss." The voice belonged to her wingman, Captain Marco Kid Valerius. He was young, talented, and chafed under the yoke of their squadron's perceived irrelevance. He leaned against the forward landing gear, his helmet tucked under his arm. "Okay, we're just the insurance policy nobody wants to cash in. he grumbled, kicking at a loose stone. Patrolling for scorpions while Ghost Flight gets to play guardian angel. It's a waste of fuel. Every mission matters, kid. Anya said, her voice soft but firm as she checked the munitions locks on a Maverick missile. We fly the sector we're given. We stay ready. That's the job. Ready for what? A camel stampede. For whatever comes. She finished, meeting his gaze. There was a finality in her tone that ended the discussion. He sighed and pushed himself off the gear. Yes, ma'am. Ready for whatever comes. Climbing into the cockpit. Anya felt the familiar embrace of the titanium tub. She strapped herself in the clicks of the buckles, a steady rhythm. As the canopy lowered, sealing her in her world, narrowed to the instruments and the view beyond the glass. To the east, the first hint of dawn was a faint violet line drawn across the horizon, outlining the jagged peaks of the Ambaria Range. They didn't look like mountains. They looked like teeth. The F-35s were the first to go. Their engines erupted with a clean, searing roar that shook the very air, and they climbed into the sky on pillars of blue flame, vanishing into the darkness with terrifying speed. Minutes later, the C-130 lumbered down the runway, a heavy bird carrying a precious cargo of soldiers into the unknown. Then it was their turn. The tower cleared Havoc Flight for takeoff. Anya pushed the throttles forward, and Hilda's twin engines spooled up with their distinctive, hungry groan. The A-10 didn't leap into the air. It clawed its way up, a testament to raw power and brute force. As the wheels left the ground, she felt the immense weight of the aircraft, the fuel, the 174 rounds in her cannon, the bombs and missiles under her wings. It was a payload meant for a war zone, and she was flying it toward an empty map grid. She banked the heavy jet to the south, following the flight plan for Route Jupiter. But her head turned to the east. She watched the mountains now catching the first golden rays of the sun, until they were just a distant, menacing silhouette behind her. Her orders sent her one way, but her every instinct was screaming at her to turn back. Miles away in the hushed cold air of the Tactical Operations Center, the war was still a clean affair. Colonel Marcus Richter stood before the primary holographic display, a god observing his universe of neat color-coded icons. The blue chevron of Talon 3 moved steadily through a digital representation of the Corin Valley. High above the orbiting green circles of Ghost Flight, the F-35s painted invisible patterns in the stratosphere. The flow of data was seamless. The plan was unfolding exactly as he had designed it. It was precise, logical, and efficient. Talon 3, this is command. Richter spoke into his console microphone, his voice resonating with calm authority. Report status. The reply came from Talon 3's leader, Captain Eva Rostova, Anya's younger sister, a fact known to only a handful of people on the base. Command, Talon 3 is approaching checkpoint Alpha. All clear. The valley is quiet. Too quiet. Richter's brow furrowed slightly at the last comment, an unprofessional, emotional assessment. Stick to the facts, Captain, he advised. Your high cover has a clear view. If there was anything to see, they'd see it. A moment of static, and then Ava's voice again, tighter this time. Command, I have movement. North Ridge. Can't confirm numbers. Ghost 1, divert your sensor package to the North Ridge grid, 47 Charlie, Richter ordered. The reply from the F-35 pilot was detached, clinical. Copy, Command. Slaving sensors. I'm seeing some thermal clutter, could be wildlife. No confirmed hostiles. And then, the universe of clean icons and calm voices shattered. The operations center's speakers erupted with a hurricane of sound, the guttural roar of heavy machine guns, the sharp crack of sniper fire, the concussive whoomp of RPGs. Over it all was Ava's voice, stripped of all calm, raw with adrenaline and fury. Schneck contact ambush. We're pinned down in the ravine, taking fire from 3 sides. Talon 3 is hit. The neat blue chevron on Richter's display began to flash an urgent, angry red. The operators in the pit scrambled, their voices rising in a controlled cacophony as they tried to make sense of the chaos. Richter's face had become a mask of stone, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of his console. His perfect equation had just been violated by the ugly, unpredictable variable of reality. Ghost 1, engage. Richter commanded, his voice like cracking ice. Neutralize hostiles on the ridges, provide immediate close air support. The perspective shifted to the sterile cockpit of the F-35 35,000 feet above the fray. Below the Corin Valley was a geography of abstract shapes and shadows. On his panoramic display, the pilot saw a confusing cluster of thermal signatures all bleeding together. The enemy was using the terrain, firing from caves and from behind rock formations, mere yards from Talon 3's position. Command, I can't get a clean shot. The pilot reported, his voice strained with frustration. He was a surgeon being asked to operate with a sledgehammer. They're danger close. My smallest ordnance has a blast radius that will take out the friendlies. I cannot PID the targets. Repeat, I cannot get positive identification. Use your cannon, Richter snapped. Sir, a 25mm burst from this altitude. The dispersion is too great. I'd be firing blind into the ravine. The pleas from the ground were becoming more desperate. Command, where is our air support? We are taking heavy casualties. It was Ava's voice again, ragged with exhaustion and grief. Richter felt the walls of his own certainty closing in. He had planned for every contingency except this one, a situation that couldn't be solved with superior technology. A situation that required a blunter, more intimate form of violence. As if to seal their fate, the F-35 pilot's voice cut through the static with the one message a commander never wants to hear. Command, Ghost 1 is at bingo fuel. We have 5 minutes of loiter time before we have to return to base. The 2 green circles on the holographic map blinked a final damning notification of their impending departure. The high-tech guardians were leaving. The chapter ended in the sudden echoing silence of the sky. The sounds of the firefight still raged over the comms, a visceral testament to the unfolding slaughter below. But the promise of air support was gone. Colonel Richter stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the flashing red icon of Talon 3. His plan was in ruins. His technological superiority was a phantom. And the soldiers he had sent into that valley, trusting in his flawless strategy, were being cut to pieces. For the first time in his decorated career, Marcus Richter was watching his soldiers die, and he was utterly, completely helpless. The silence left by the departed F-35s was more terrifying than their roar had been. In the Tactical Operations Center, that silence was filled by the unvarnished sounds of slaughter. Every crackle of gunfire, every explosion, every strained cry for a medic coming through the speakers was a nail being hammered into the coffin of Richter's authority. His men were dying, and the most advanced air power in the world had been reduced to the role of a helpless spectator. He paced behind the main console, a caged tiger. The precise, orderly world of data had devolved into pure, hot chaos. His staff, a collection of the military's brightest minds, offered him nothing but dead ends. Sir, Reaper drone is offline for a software upgrade. Predator is armed but 3 hours away. Nearest attack helicopters are on the other side of the range, supporting a different operation. Each report was a fresh wave of failure washing over him. He listened to the comms feed the desperate fragmented transmissions from Talon 3, forming a mosaic of horror. He heard a young soldier screaming for his mother. He heard the calm, steady voice of a sergeant directing fire even after being hit. And through it all, he heard Captain Ava Rostova, her voice hoarse, calling out targets, trying to hold her team together as it was being systematically dismantled. A young communications officer, barely 20, turned from his console, his face ashen. He looked like he was going to be sick. "Sir, update from Talon 3. They're reporting 3 KIA, 2 wounded. They've lost their medic. Ammunition is critical. 3 killed in action." The words struck Richter with physical force. They were no longer flashing red icons on his map. They were names, faces, families. They were men who had trusted him. He had sent them into that valley armed with his arrogance, and it had gotten them killed. The control he prized above all else, the absolute intellectual command of the battle space, shattered. He slammed his open palm down on the console. The sharp crack echoed through the room, silencing the frantic chatter. Every eye turned to him. They saw not a colonel, but a man stripped bare, his face a mask of fury and self-loathing. "Get me something in the air!" He roared, his voice raw with a desperation that shocked everyone, including himself. "Right now, I don't care what it is." The chief air controller, a man accustomed to Richter's icy calm, flinched. He spun back to his own screen, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Sir, I'm showing no available strike aircraft. Everything is grounded, rearming, or out of theater." "Everything," Richter demanded, stepping toward him, his presence radiating menace. "Check again." "Sir, The controller's eyes widened as he scanned the wide area display. "Wait. There is one flight airborne. Havoc flight. Captain Rostova's A-10s. But their patrol grid is over 100 miles south of the Corin Valley. They're too far away." Anya Rostova. The name hit him like a physical blow. The pilot with the calm eyes. The woman who flew the blunt instrument. The one he had dismissed with such casual condescension. The irony was a bitter poison in his throat. His entire philosophy, his career built on the supremacy of next-generation technology, had crumbled to dust in less than an hour. And his only remaining card, his last improbable hope, was a vintage airframe he had mocked just that morning. He saw her face then clear as day in his mind's eye. Sometimes the most effective data link is a human voice. The last vestiges of his pride, burned away, consumed by the fires of his failure. He lunged for the master broadcast microphone, the one that overrode every channel. He wasn't thinking like a colonel anymore. He was thinking like a man trying to stop a nightmare. He keyed the mic, and his voice, stripped of all rank and composure, boomed across every radio frequency on the base, a ragged primal shout of a man on the edge of the abyss. "I don't care what it is, get me an asset over the Corin Valley now." "Any jet will do." The words echoed in the stunned silence of the toast. The operators stared at their commander, a man they had never seen lose control. His desperate plea hung in the air, a prayer hurled into an empty sky. 100 miles south, Captain Anya Rostova flew a lazy orbit over a sun-bleached hellscape. The desert of Rote Jupiter stretched to every horizon, a featureless tan canvas. Below, the heat shimmered, making the air dance. It was the epitome of a non-mission, a task, designed to keep her and her Warthog out of sight and out of mind. Her wingman Marco flew a perfect, disciplined formation off her right wing. The only sound in her helmet was the steady hum of the engines and the low, monotonous hiss of the open radio channel. It was the sound of boredom. Then the command frequency, normally a place of routine check-ins and weather updates, came alive. It started not with a clear order, but with a bleed over of panicked voices, distorted and overlapping. Anya's hand, acting on pure instinct, immediately rolled the volume dial to maximum. The story of the Corin Valley ambush spilled into her cockpit raw and unfiltered. She heard the contact report. She heard the desperate calls for air support. She heard the calm, professional denial from Ghost 1, the F-35 pilot, who was too high, too fast, and too clean for this kind of fight. Most chillingly, she heard the call sign Talon 3 and the strained voice of its commander, her sister Ava. The cold knot of apprehension she'd felt that morning tightened into a ball of ice in her stomach. This was her premonition made real. Marco's voice crackled over their private comms channel. "Valkyrie, did you hear that they're getting torn to pieces?" Anya didn't reply immediately. Her eyes were fixed on the eastern horizon, on the faint, hazy outline of the mountain range. Her orders were explicit: maintain station. Deviating without authorization was a career-ending offense, a potential court-martial. But the rules of engagement, the sterile doctrines written in quiet rooms far from the fight, meant nothing against the sound of her sister's team being overrun. Her hands moved with a purpose that bypassed conscious thought. She pushed the throttles forward and banked the heavy A-10 so hard that the G-force pressed her deep into her seat. The nose of the Warthog swung away from the empty desert and pointed directly toward the mountains. "Valkyrie lead, what's our vector?" Marco asked, his voice a mix of alarm and excitement as he expertly maneuvered his own jet to match her movement. "We don't have orders to engage." "We do now," Anya said, her voice a low, steady thing that left no room for argument. "We have a moral order. Havoc 2 form on my wing. We're going hunting." For a heartbeat, there was only the sound of their engines. Then Marco's reply, firm and resolved. "Copy lead. On your wing. Let's go spill some iron." Just as they leveled out, accelerating to the A-10's maximum speed, a voice exploded across the command frequency. It was a voice they had never heard before. Not the calm, collected Colonel Richter, but a desperate, broken man. It was a roar that seemed to shake the very sky. "I don't care what it is. Get me an asset over the Corin Valley now. Any jet will do." In the talk, the desperate shout was followed by a stunned, helpless silence. For 3 long seconds, the only sound was the crackle of the ongoing firefight. Then a new voice cut through the static. It was clear, calm, and utterly professional. "Tower, this is Havoc 1, call sign Valkyrie. Be advised I am en route to the Corin Valley grid 47 Charlie. Angels 5 descending. Time to station 6 minutes. Richter froze. He stared at the communications console as if a ghost had just spoken. Valkyrie. 6 minutes. The numbers didn't add up. From her assigned grid, it should have taken her at least 15 minutes, maybe more. He did the calculation in his head, a frantic, sickening piece of mental arithmetic. And then he understood. She was already halfway there. She hadn't waited for his order. She hadn't waited to be asked. The moment she heard the trouble, the pilot he had dismissed as a relic had broken protocol and raced toward the sound of the guns. Colonel Marcus Richter, the man of data and doctrine, went pale. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, translucent sheen. It was not the pallor of fear for his men that had come earlier. This was something different. This was the shock of a man whose entire world view had been shattered. He had sneered at her romantic notions, and in his moment of greatest need, she was embodying the very creed he had forgotten: a warrior's duty is to the warrior next to them. He had said, "Any jet will do," a plea born of utter desperation. Then he went pale when he realized her A-10 was first on scene not by chance or by order, but by the sheer, insubordinate, heroic will of its pilot. The desert vanished behind her, replaced by a brutal, unforgiving landscape of rock and shadow. Anya pushed Hilda lower the A-10's engines, screaming in protest as she skimmed over the jagged foothills. The ride was a constant, violent bucking the air, thick and turbulent this close to the ground. Every gust of wind threatened to slam her into a hillside. This was a realm where sensors and satellites were useless, a place where only a pilot's instinct and an aircraft's resilience mattered. She was flying not by her instruments, but by feel the stick alive in her hand, the airframe groaning around her as she threaded a needle through the opening passes of the mountain range. She crested the final ridge and dove into the Corin Valley. The world outside her canopy snapped from an endless sky to a claustrophobic gray-brown tunnel. The canyon walls were a terrifying, intimate blur just beyond her wingtips. Sunlight was a rare commodity here, flashing in disorienting strobes between the high peaks. She was a whisper away from disaster, a single error in judgment, from becoming a smear of burning metal on the rocks. Yet in this crucible of high-speed, low-altitude flight, she felt a sense of absolute clarity. This was Hilda's natural habitat. This was where the Warthog belonged. The command frequency was still a useless cacophony. She switched her radio to a discrete tactical channel, a frequency she and her sister had drilled for emergencies since their academy days. Talon 3, this is Valkyrie on Victor 2. If you read me, talk to me. Where are you, and where's the hurt? For a tense second, there was only static. Then a voice ragged and breathless, but blessedly familiar. Anya. Valkyrie copy. We read you. It was Ava. The use of her first name was a momentary crack in the professional facade, a flicker of desperate relief before the soldier took over again. We are pinned in the dry riverbed at Grid 47, Charlie 9, taking concentrated fire from machine gun nests on the north and east ridges. Multiple RPG teams in the cave mouths 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock high. Copy that, Talon 3? Anya replied, her own voice a steady, calming counterpoint. The sound of her sister's voice, strained but alive, sharpened her focus to a razor's edge. I have you visual. Pop green smoke on your position now. I need you to be my eyes. Mark the primary threats. I'm coming in hot from the south for a look. A plume of vivid green smoke billowed upwards from behind a cluster of boulders, a fragile beacon in a landscape of death. As Anya rocketed over their position, the scene below resolved itself from a tactical map into a human tragedy. She saw the huddled forms of the surviving soldiers. She saw the muzzle flashes winking from the dark mouths of caves and from behind fortified rock ledges. Red and green tracers clawed at her aircraft, a storm of angry hornets. She felt them more than heard them, a series of sharp, percussive thuds against the fuselage as rounds ricocheted off the titanium bathtub surrounding her cockpit. Hilda shuddered, but flew on unwavering. Her mind processed it all in a fraction of a second, the heavy machine gun emplacement that had the team completely suppressed the RPG gunner preparing to fire the sniper's nest high on the eastern ridge. She had seen enough. This was not a job for a single bomb. This was intimate, brutal surgery. She pulled back on the stick, and the A-10 roared upwards in a gut-wrenching climb, trading speed for altitude, positioning herself to turn back into the fight. The enemy, emboldened, intensified their fire, filling the air around her with shrapnel. They thought she was fleeing. They were wrong. She was a predator coiling to strike. Over the radio, her voice was transformed. The calm reassurance was gone, replaced by the cold, hard authority of the huntress. It was a promise delivered to her wingman above and the desperate soldiers below. Havoc 2. I'm rolling in hot on the eastern ridge. Target is the MG nest. Talon 3, keep your heads down. Hell is coming to breakfast. Her thumb moved from the stick to the weapons control panel, her eyes narrowing as she locked onto the first target. The battle for the Corin Valley was about to begin. The world turned on its side. Anya rolled the A-10 into a steep 60-degree dive, the ground rushing up to meet her with dizzying speed. In her heads-up display, the green symbology of the targeting pipper settled and locked onto the rocky ledge where the enemy heavy machine gun spat death. Her entire being narrowed to that single point of light on the glass canopy. The airframe shuddered, the wind screamed past the cockpit, but inside there was a core of absolute calm. She was no longer a pilot. She was the tip of a spear, a conduit for the terrible power coiled at the heart of her machine. Her thumb rested on the red button atop the control stick. On the ground, huddled behind a crumbling rock wall, Eva Rostova prepared to die. Her ammunition was down to a single magazine. 2 of her remaining soldiers were badly wounded. The enemy machine gun had them zeroed in its relentless fire, chewing their cover to dust. She closed her eyes, clutching her rifle, listening to the final rhythmic thud of the bullets striking stone. Then a new sound cut through the din. It was not a gunshot or an explosion. It was a high-pitched alien shriek, like the sound of the sky itself being torn in half. Her eyes snapped open. She looked up and saw it. The A-10. It was impossibly close, a brutal silhouette of straight wings and twin engines diving not just at the mountain, but seemingly at them. It grew larger and larger until it filled her entire vision. And then from the nose of the aircraft, a torrent of orange-white fire erupted. The sound that followed was not a sound at all. It was a physical event. A continuous apocalyptic roar that vibrated through the ground, through her bones, through her teeth. Bert! It lasted for only 2 seconds, but in those 2 seconds, the world ended and was remade. The machine gun nest on the ridge didn't just explode. It ceased to exist, vaporized in a storm of 30mm high explosive shells. The air filled with the smell of cordite and pulverized rock. In the Tactical Operations Center, the operators flinched as if from a physical blow. Richter stood ramrod straight, his eyes clamped shut, listening. The sound of the GAU-8 Avenger cannon transmitted through a soldier's open mic flooded the room. It was a raw, primeval sound that had no place in their world of quiet keystrokes and sterile data streams. God Almighty! An operator whispered into the stunned silence. That's the cannon. Richter's eyes opened. He was listening to the symphony of his own humiliation, and it was the most beautiful music he had ever heard. Anya pulled out of the dive, the G-forces crushing her into her seat. She jinked hard to the right, evading a volley of small arms fire, her mind already on the next target. Havoc 2 watch for RPGs from the northern caves. I'm taking the west face. Firing Maverick. She selected the missile, its camera feed appearing on one of her cockpit displays. She saw the dark mouth of a cave, a flash of movement inside. She locked on. Rifle, she said calmly, squeezing the trigger. The missile dropped from the wing with a silent, clean release, its rocket motor igniting a second later, leaving a trail of white smoke. She watched on her screen as the small gray crosshair flew unerringly toward the blackness of the cave. The screen went white with the force of the impact. First cave is closed for business. She reported, already banking to line up the next one. On the ground, the surviving members of Talon 3 watched in stunned disbelief. The oppressive weight of enemy fire which had been crushing them for the better part of an hour was being lifted piece by piece. The angel of death they had been expecting had been driven away by an avenging angel in a Warthog. They saw the missile strike the cave, saw the second cave silenced by another perfectly placed rocket. A young soldier, his face streaked with tears and dirt, let out a raw, hoarse cheer. The sound was infectious. Back in the talk, Anya's voice became the only thing that mattered. Western RPG team neutralized. Brrrt. Sniper position on the high ridge is suppressed. Last known hostile position silenced. Each calm, clipped report was a vindication. Each roar of the cannon was a judgment. Richter listened motionless as this one woman and her obsolete machine did what his entire network of fifth-generation assets could not. She was not a blunt instrument. She was a surgeon's scalpel wielded with a warrior's soul. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The cannon fell silent. The explosions stopped. The only sound from the Corin Valley was the wind and the faint, triumphant whine of Anya's engines as she made one final, slow pass over the riverbed. In the cockpit, Anya took her first deep breath, her knuckles aching from their grip on the stick. On the ground, Eva leaned her head back against the rock, looking up at the gray angel circling above the hot sting of tears, finally breaking through her shock. And in the tow, Colonel Richter stood in the beautiful, ringing silence, listening to the sound of his soldiers still being alive. The silence in the Corin Valley was as shocking as the preceding violence. It was a heavy, ringing quiet, punctuated only by the mournful whistle of the wind through the ravines. Anya made one final slow pass over the riverbed, her wings dipping in a gesture of acknowledgement. Below, she saw the survivors of Talon 3 moving with the slow, deliberate motions of those who have narrowly escaped death. They were tending to their wounded, securing their fallen. She saw a lone figure detach from the group and look up, raising a hand, not in a wave but in a solemn salute. Eva. Anya keyed her mic, her voice raspy with fatigue. Talon 3 extraction is on its way. What's your status? Ava's voice came back steadier now, but freighted with the cost of their survival. We're holding Valkyrie. We have casualties, but we're holding. Thank you, Anya. You got here. Always Ava. Always. Anya whispered the words for her sister alone. To the open channel she said, Understood, Talon 3. Valkyrie is Winchester of cannon and returning to base. She banked the wounded Warthog west, turning her back on the Valley of Ghosts. The moment she was clear of the mountains, the adrenaline that had sustained her drained away, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. Her muscles screamed in protest from the high-G maneuvers. Her head throbbed. A constellation of yellow and red warning lights flickered on her console, a testament to the punishment Hilda had absorbed. Looking out at her left wing, she could count a dozen fresh holes, jagged tears in the metal skin. The plane, like her, was wounded, but flying. Marco pulled his own A-10 alongside hers. Valkyrie, you have serious damage to your port engine housing. He reported, his voice filled with a reverence she had never heard from him before. And, hell, boss. I've never seen flying like that. Not in any simulator. Huh, she's a tough bird, Anya replied, patting the side of her cockpit. She brought us through. As the sprawling outline of the base appeared on the horizon, she initiated the standard call to the control tower. Tower Havoc flight is 10 miles out inbound for landing, requesting... She was cut off by the controller. His voice sharp and clear, stripped of its usual monotonous cadence. Havoc 1, we've been waiting for you. The field is yours. You are cleared for a priority straight-in approach to runway 1. All other traffic is holding. Welcome home, Valkyrie. Her landing was flawless, the tires kissing the asphalt with a gentle puff of smoke, despite the crosswind and the damage. As she taxied off the active runway, she knew something was different. The relentless, noisy rhythm of the base had paused. On the taxiway, a crew chief working on an F-35 stopped and slowly took off his cap. Further on, a group of munitions loaders stood motionless, simply watching her pass. No one was smiling. No one was cheering. It was something deeper, a silent, base-wide gesture of solemn respect. She brought Hilda to her designated hardstand, the far-forgotten corner of the flight line. Elias was there, his face a grim mask. He didn't speak as she began the shutdown sequence. Instead, he walked a slow circle around the aircraft, his weathered hand hovering over the bullet holes and shrapnel scars, as if assessing the wounds of a living creature. The hydraulic whine of the canopy opening was the loudest sound in the world. Hot, dusty air flooded the cockpit. Anya unstrapped herself and climbed stiffly down the ladder, every joint protesting. She stood on the tarmac, the concrete radiating the day's heat, and felt the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on her. The silence was absolute. It was the sound of minds being changed, the sound of a reputation being forged in fire. Elias finally came to stand beside her, his gaze fixed on a deep gash near the cockpit. "They threw everything they had at you two," he said, his voice thick. Anya reached out and laid a gloved hand on Hilda's scarred nose just below the snarling shark's teeth. The metal was still hot. "She took it," Anya said, her voice barely a whisper. "She took it all." Elias nodded slowly, finally looking at her, his eyes shining with a fierce, protective pride. "That you did, Captain. Both of you." The sun was just beginning its ascent the next morning, painting the eastern sky in pale shades of rose and gold. The air was cool and still. In the quiet solitude of the flight line, Anya stood beside Hilda. Sleep had been a fleeting, restless thing, so she had come here instead, to the only place that felt like solid ground. She wasn't in her flight suit, but in simple fatigues, a soft rag in her hand. She moved slowly, deliberately, wiping away the streaks of soot and hydraulic fluid from the Warthog's scarred skin. It was a quiet penance, a tender ministration to the machine that had carried her through the crucible and back. She heard the footsteps on the asphalt behind her, crisp and measured. She didn't look up, assuming it was Elias or Marco. But the footsteps stopped a respectful distance away, and the silence that followed was heavy with authority. She turned slowly. Colonel Marcus Richter stood alone, silhouetted against the rising sun. He held a small black data slate in his hand. The uniform was immaculate as always, but the man inside it seemed diminished, the sharp edges of his arrogance worn smooth. He looked older. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Richter's gaze wasn't on her, but on the A-10. He walked forward, his eyes cataloging the damage with a newfound understanding. He saw the stitched pattern of bullet holes across the wing, the deep gouge in the engine nacelle, the web of cracks in the armored glass of the canopy. He stopped and lightly touched the score mark just below the cockpit, where a heavy caliber round had been deflected by the titanium tub. He was finally seeing the savage reality he had dismissed as a romantic notion. He was looking at proof that war was not an equation, and that survivability was measured in inches of armor as much as in degrees of stealth. The ground crew's post-flight inspection, he said finally, his voice low and devoid of its usual clipped arrogance. They logged over 200 separate impacts from small arms fire and fragmentation. The report said the aircraft should not have been able to maintain controlled flight. Anya simply nodded her hand, never ceasing its gentle circular motion with the rag. She would not make this easy for him. She would not offer absolution. He looked from the plane to her, and for the first time she saw not a commander assessing an asset, but a man grappling with the weight of his own fallibility. He extended the data slate to her. I spent the early morning reviewing operational readiness and future budget allocations. He said, his tone meticulously formal. I have just signed the order. Your entire squadron is being approved for the Vindicator upgrade package. It includes new lightweight armor composites, enhanced threat detection suites, and full integration with the 5th-generation data link network. The work begins next week. This was it. Not an apology, which would have been hollow, but a capitulation. An act of profound institutional respect. It was an admission that he was wrong, written not in a letter of reprimand for her, but in a multi-million-dollar upgrade for the machine he had scorned. The enhanced data links were the final unspoken concession, an acknowledgement that her blunt instrument had a vital place at the heart of his modern war. Anya stopped her work and took the slate. Her fingers brushed against his, and in that fleeting contact, a current of understanding passed between them. Their eyes met. There was no warmth, no forgiveness. There was something far more valuable, a hard-earned, unspoken respect between two warriors who had been tested by the same fire and come out changed. He gave her a single, crisp nod, the gesture of a commander to a soldier whose worth was no longer in question. Then he turned and walked away, his solitary figure shrinking against the vast backdrop of the runway. Anya stood for a long time watching him go. She looked down at the upgrade order glowing on the screen in her hand, then looked up at the scarred, indomitable face of Hilda. The sun had risen fully now, bathing them both in its clear, honest light. The respect Colonel Richter had granted her in the quiet dawn had by nightfall become a palpable, awkward presence across the entire base. In the officers' club, the low hum of conversation would dip whenever Anya entered a room. Pilots who had once looked through her now met her eyes and gave a slow, deliberate nod. She was no longer a relic. She was a legend. And it was a deeply uncomfortable mantle to wear. She sat at a small table in the corner with Marco nursing a beer. He was enjoying their newfound status far more than she was accepting the free drinks and retelling a sanitized, heroic version of the battle to anyone who would listen. Anya remained silent, watching the eddies and currents of the room. She felt like an exhibit in a museum, the Warthog pilot on display. A tall, lean officer in an F-35 flight suit detached himself from the bar and walked over. His insignia identified him as Major Thorne, the flight lead for Ghost 1. He was the pilot who had been unable to engage. Anya braced herself for something, arrogance, an excuse, a challenge. She got none of them. "One on Captain Rostova," he said, his voice quiet and even. "I'm Thorne. I was high cover for Talon 3. Anya simply nodded, waiting. "My sensor suite is worth more than your entire airframe," he stated, not as a boast, but as a plain, bitter fact. "And from 30,000 feet, I couldn't tell the rocks from the soldiers. I couldn't do a damn thing but listen to them die." He looked her straight in the eye. "What you did down in that canyon, the feeds from your gun camera are already required viewing at the academy. I'm glad you were there. I'm glad you broke the rules." He placed a fresh beer on her table. "This is from my whole squadron." He gave a curt nod and walked away without another word. The gesture was a truce, a white flag raised between the old world and the new. Marco whistled softly. "Well, hell has officially frozen over." Anya didn't reply. She couldn't enjoy the victory. The ghosts of the battle were too close. She excused herself, leaving Marco to his audience, and walked out into the cool night air. The sounds of the club faded behind her, replaced by the distant hum of generators. Her steps led her, as she knew they would, to the sterile, quiet corridors of the base hospital. Ava was in a private room, sitting up in bed, her left arm in a sling and a line of dark purple stitches tracing her hairline. The physical wounds were the least of it. Her eyes, so much like Anya's, were hollowed out by grief and exhaustion. The air in the room was thick with the weight of the 3 soldiers who had not come back. They didn't speak for a long time. Anya simply pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. There were no congratulations, no talk of heroism. "Sergeant Miller," Eva said finally, her voice a dry rasp. He had twin daughters. He kept their pictures taped inside his helmet. Corporal Diaz, he was just a kid, 19, on his first deployment. "It wasn't your fault, Eva," Anya said softly. "I led them in there." Eva countered, her gaze fixed on the sterile white wall. "Richter's plan, my execution. It doesn't matter. The names on the casualty report are my responsibility." She finally turned to look at Anya, a flicker of pained irony in her eyes. "In the debriefing, they're calling you the Angel of the Corin. They say you saved us." She took a shaky breath. "But you come in here and you don't see the victory, Anya. You just see the cost. You see the empty spaces where good men used to be." Anya reached out and took her sister's hand. It was cold. The triumph on the flight line, the respect in the club, it all melted away in the face of this stark, painful reality. Her actions hadn't created a victory. They had only staved off a total defeat. The price for that had still been paid in blood. She sat with her sister late into the night, the two of them bound by a shared, silent understanding of the true face of war. When Anya finally left the hospital, she paused and looked up at the vast, star-dusted sky. The vindication she had earned felt less like a medal on her chest and more like a heavy stone in her heart. It was a burden of responsibility, a solemn promise to the ghosts of Talon 3 that their sacrifice would be remembered not as a statistic in a clean digital victory, but as the terrible human price of peace. The first C5 Galaxy transport arrived a week later, its cavernous hold filled with sealed black crates stenciled with the word Vindicator. Within hours, the sleepy, forgotten hangar of the A-10 squadron was transformed into a chaotic nexus of old iron and new technology. Civilian contractors in sterile white overalls moved alongside grease-stained airmen, and the familiar clang of wrenches was now mixed with the quiet hum of diagnostic laptops. Anya stood with Master Sergeant Elias watching as a team of technicians carefully removed a panel from Hilda's cockpit, exposing the tangled web of analog wiring that was her central nervous system. They were preparing to graft a digital brain onto the soul of a beast. "They're turning a sledgehammer into a scalpel, Captain." Elias grumbled, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He watched a young technician connect a fiber optic cable with the kind of suspicion usually reserved for unexploded ordnance. A pilot needs a switch she can feel with her gloves on in a smoke-filled cockpit, not a touchscreen that'll crack if you look at it too hard. This is just more stuff to fail when the shooting starts. Anya understood his skepticism. It came from a place of love and a deep, practical knowledge of what it took to keep these planes flying. She felt a pang of nostalgia for the familiar worn dials herself, but she also saw the bigger picture. "It's still a Warthog, Elias," she said, her voice reassuring. "The same titanium tub, the same engines, the same gun. We're just giving her better eyes and ears. It won't change how she flies, but it will change how she fights. We have to evolve. Richter gave us a lifeline, not a leash." Her words were confident, but her own transition was not without struggle. Later that week in the new Vindicator simulator, she found herself overwhelmed. The simple functional layout she knew was gone, replaced by 3 gleaming multi-function displays, a glass cockpit. A river of data now flowed, where before there had been a simple needle and a dial. She could see what the F-35s were seeing, track drone feeds, and manage a dozen new variables. For the first hour, it felt less like flying and more like data entry. The pure, instinctual connection she had with the aircraft felt muted, filtered through layers of software. It was a new kind of battle one fought against her own muscle memory. The true purpose of this evolution became clear at an urgent intelligence briefing 2 days later. The room was cold, the mood somber. Colonel Richter stood before the main display, his face grim. Anya was there, as was Major Thorne. Our intelligence has made a breakthrough. Richter began, his voice devoid of any triumph. The ambush in the Corin Valley was not a random encounter. It was a deliberately planned and executed trap. The architect is a regional commander known only by the code name Javelin. An image appeared on the screen, a grainy long-distance photograph of a man with a hard face and a commander's bearing. Javelin is intelligent, ruthless, and he is consolidating power. We now believe he was the one who acquired the advanced radar system that was Talon 3's original objective. He used our own mission to draw our special forces into a kill box. Richter paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He is directly responsible for our losses. Anya felt a cold stillness spread through her. This was the face of her sister's grief, the architect of the empty bunks in the barracks. Richter's gaze swept across the room, finally settling on Anya and Thorne. The first attempt to neutralize this threat failed because our approach was fractured. I relied on one system, and it was the wrong one for the environment. We will not make that mistake again. The priority of this base is now the location and neutralization of Javelin and his network. He clicked a button, and a complex flight plan appeared on the screen, showing 2 different colored arrows, one high and fast, one low and slow, converging on a single point in the mountains. This will be a fully integrated operation. Ghost Flight will provide stealth reconnaissance and electronic warfare. Havoc Flight with your new Vindicator systems will provide the direct overwatch and on-station firepower. You will not be a contingency. You will be the tip of the spear together. He looked directly at Anya, then at Thorne. The 2 of you will be the mission leads. Learn to fly together. Learn to trust each other's instincts and each other's technology. Your first joint training exercise is at 500 tomorrow. The briefing was dismissed. Anya and Thorne remained in their seats for a moment, the mission map glowing between them. The rivalry was gone, but a partnership had not yet been forged. They were 2 different warriors from 2 different skies, now bound by a single name and a shared objective. The hunt for Javelin had begun. The sterile blue light of the digital planning table cast sharp shadows on the faces of Anya and Major Thorne. It was 0500, and the air in the mission briefing room was thick with a tense professional silence. They stood on opposite sides of the table, 2 predators from different ecosystems forced to hunt together. Their task was to map out a simulated strike against a fortified position deep in a mountain range, identical to the one where Javelin was suspected to be hiding. Their different philosophies clashed immediately. Thorne, moving with an economy of motion, plotted elegant high-altitude flight paths, creating overlapping sensor envelopes and corridors for data linking. Ghost Flight will enter first, sanitize the airspace and suppress enemy air defenses. Havoc Flight will follow at 15,000 feet high-speed ingress and egress to minimize exposure. We'll be in and out in 4 minutes. Anya placed her hand on the table, stopping the simulation. Negative, Major. That neuters my aircraft. The A-10's value is persistence. We need to be low using the terrain to mask our approach. My job isn't to be fast. It's to be there. To have eyes on the target for the ground team long before and long after the bombs fall. Flying low and slow is how you get shot down, Captain. Thorne countered, his tone clipped. My job is to ensure all assets return to base. A Warthog can't dodge a modern surface-to-air missile, and a lightning can't see a machine gun nest tucked under a rock ledge. Anya shot back, her voice dangerously quiet. As we've already established. The tension vibrated between them. In the main operations center, Colonel Richter watched the exchange on a remote feed. His aide shifted nervously. "Sir, perhaps you should intervene." "So no." Richter set, his eyes fixed on the screen. "Steel is sharpened against steel. Let them find their own edge." Back in the briefing room, the standoff held for a moment longer. It was Thorn who yielded first, a subtle concession. "Show me your ingress route." Anya traced a new path on the map, a winding, treacherous line that hugged the canyon floors. "It's risky," she admitted, "but it keeps me shielded from their primary radar until the last second." Thorn studied it, then overlaid his own flight path. "All right, we compromise. I'll take my flight in first and use my electronic warfare suite to blind their SAM network. It'll give you a 10-minute window where their long-range threat is deaf and dumb. Can you get into position in 10 minutes? Anya nodded. "We can." A new plan, neither his nor hers but theirs, began to form. In the air, the theory became a tense reality. The F-35s were invisible ghosts, their presence felt only through the data streaming into Anya's new cockpit displays. Thorn's voice was a calm presence in her ear, a stream of digital information translated into a pilot's language. "Valkyrie, be advised, I'm painting a simulated early warning radar bearing 270. I'm jamming it now. Your corridor is open." On her screen, a threatening red icon flickered and then winked out. For the first time, Anya felt the true power of the integration, the Warthog's brawn guided by the Lightning's brain. Then came the test. The simulated ground team, using the same call sign as her sister's unit Talon 3, radioed for immediate assistance. "We are pinned down by an entrenched artillery piece in a cave. We cannot get a laser designation on it from our position." It was a nightmare echo of the Corin Valley. Thorn's voice confirmed the problem. "Valkyrie? I'm overhead, but the heat signature is masked by the rock. I have no clean line of sight. I can't PID the target." Anya pushed the stick forward, diving into the narrow canyon. The new targeting pod slaved to her helmet, the view displayed on her main screen. She saw the cave, a dark slash in the rock, just as the ground team had described. She zoomed in the infrared overlay, revealing the hot, deadly shape of the artillery piece inside. She was the eyes in the valley. "I have positive ID ghost lead." She transmitted, her voice steady. "The target is marked. I'm feeding you the coordinates now, on your screen." She keyed the data link. High above, Thorn saw a new symbol bloom on his own tactical display, a perfect enemy red crosshair provided by the A-10 below. It was her eyes guiding his weapon. "Data received, Valkyrie," he replied, a new note of awe in his voice. "Target locked, simulating weapons release." The exercise controller's voice cut in. "Target destroyed, mission successful." As they reformed and turned for home, Thorn's voice came over their private channel, the professional barrier momentarily gone. "That was damn effective, Valkyrie. My ordnance, your eyes." "We're better together, Ghost Lead," Anya replied. In the operations center, Richter watched the two flight paths, one high, one low, merge into a single vector pointing toward home. A rare, thin smile touched his lips. The friction had forged a weapon. The air in the final briefing room was cold and still heavy with the ghosts of the last mission and the grim purpose of the next. Colonel Richter stood before the assembled teams, but this time he was not a lecturer dictating a flawless plan. He was a conductor introducing his lead soloists. "Major Thorn will brief you on airspace denial and electronic warfare. Captain Rostova will walk you through the close support and overwatch plan." He ceded the floor, a gesture of trust that spoke volumes. Anya and Thorn stood side by side, a unified front. Beside them, Captain Eva Rostova, her arm now free of its sling, her face set and determined, represented the third point of their deadly trinity, the tip of the spear on the ground. A silent look passed between the three of them, a shared understanding of the risks, the stakes, and the debt of blood they were there to repay. The mission began in the deep ink of a moonless night. Far above, Thorn's F-35s slipped through the sky like slivers of darkness, unheard and unseen, their powerful sensors drinking in the electronic signatures of the world below. Miles behind, and thousands of feet lower, Anya led havoc flight, her Warthogs threading through the mountain passes like nocturnal predators. Her new cockpit displays were no longer a source of confusion, but a window into Thorn's invisible world. She saw the threats, he saw the gaps in radar coverage, he identified the silent digital tapestry of the hunt. "Valkyrie, this is Ghost." Lead Thorn's voice was a calm whisper in her ear. Intel missed something. "I'm painting a mobile search radar protecting Javelin's southern approach. I'm not going to engage it, don't want to spook them. But I'm mapping its rotation. You'll have a 70-second blind spot on my mark." Mark. "Solid copy, Ghost." Anya replied, watching as a cone of red light pulsed and vanished from her screen. "We'll be through it before they know we're here." It was a deadly, intricate dance choreographed in real time. She brought her flight into a low, silent orbit, behind a ridge overlooking Javelin's compound, a fortified collection of buildings nestled in a dark valley. From her new perch, her upgraded targeting pod became a god's eye view, its infrared lens turning the cold, dark compound into a living map of heat signatures. She was the silent overwatch, the guardian angel waiting for the fight to begin. All call signs stand by. Eva's voice crackled over the encrypted net. Talon 3 is initiating. The night erupted in a series of muffled explosions and the disciplined chatter of automatic weapons fire. The assault was on, but Javelin's forces were prepared. A torrent of heavy machine gun fire erupted from a fortified concrete bunker on the west side of the compound, pinning Eva's lead team down. "Valkyrie, this is Talon 3. Eva shouted, her voice strained over the sound of gunfire. "We're taking heavy fire from a bunker west perimeter. We can't move." This was the moment. The echo of the past replayed under new rules. "I see it," Talon Anya said calmly. "Paint it for me." A thin, invisible laser beam from the ground team's designator splashed against the bunker's firing slit. In Anya's cockpit, it appeared as a brilliant, pulsing star. "Good sparkle. I have your mark." She instinctively prepared for a cannon run, but her new wider perspective gave her pause. Her sensors showed a secondary structure directly behind the bunker, a large fuel tank. "Stand by, Talon. My cannon rounds will overpenetrate and could detonate that fuel depot. Too much collateral." She made the command decision, a synthesis of old-school grit and new-school technology. "Ghost lead, this is Valkyrie. I have a laser-marked target designated by Talon 3. Requesting you service with low-collateral precision ordnance. I'm sending the data package now." High above, sitting in his sterile cockpit, Thorn saw the data bloom on his display, a perfect firing solution, provided by the A-10 lurking in the shadows below. "Data received, Valkyrie. Target locked. I have a GBU-39 on the way. Splash in 20 seconds. On the ground, Ava and her team hugged the earth. They didn't hear an aircraft or the roar of a cannon. They only heard the faint whistle of incoming ordnance. A silent streak fell from the black sky, striking the bunker with a single contained and devastatingly precise thump. The machine gun fell silent. The path was clear. A trio of voices, a chorus of integrated warfare confirmed the kill across the network. Thorn good effect on target. Anya confirm clean hit. The way is clear for you, Talon. Eva solid copy. Moving in, out. The hunt was not a chaotic brawl. It was a surgical execution. The ghost of the Corin Valley had been laid to rest. The mission's success did not bring celebration, but a quiet, collective exhalation of breath across the entire base. The shadow of Javelin was gone, and with it, the specter of the Corin Valley. A few days later, Anya stood in a small walled garden tucked away behind the base chapel. It was a simple, quiet place, with a single stone plaque bearing the names of those lost in the Ambaraya conflict. 3 names newly etched seemed darker than the rest. Miller, Diaz, Sandoval. Her sister came and stood beside her. They didn't speak, simply sharing the silence, their shoulders almost touching. The muted sounds of the base, a distant engine test, a rolling transport truck seemed a world away. "We got him, Anya," Eva said finally, her voice soft. The intel from his compound led to the rest of his network. It's over. That chapter, at least. She paused, her eyes fixed on the names. It doesn't bring them back, but it matters. It has to. It matters. Anya affirmed, her own voice thick with emotion. The victory was not in the enemy they had destroyed, but in the memory of the men they had honored by doing so. When she left the garden, she found Colonel Richter waiting on the path. He wasn't standing at attention or carrying a data slate. He was just a man, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the sun begin its slow descent. He waited for her to approach, meeting her as an equal. "I-10 Doctrine, your joint after-action report with Major Thorne is making waves at the Pentagon," he said, forgoing any preamble. "They're calling the mission a new doctrinal template for joint asset engagement. It seems you two have rather accidentally written the new book on close air support." He turned to face her more fully, his expression one she had never seen before. Not arrogance, not desperation, but a quiet, academic respect. "They want you and Thorne to return stateside to head up the new integrated tactics training program." It was a validation beyond anything she could have imagined. Not just an upgrade for her squadron, but a fundamental change in the way the Air Force would fight a change she had forged in fire and defiance. "You were right, Captain." Richter said the words, simple, direct, and stripped of all artifice. "The technology is only as good as the warrior who wields it. The most important data link is the one that connects a pilot's eyes to the soldier on the ground." "You were also right, Colonel," Anya replied, offering a truth of her own. "We can't afford to be relics. We have to evolve to win the next fight. We just had to learn to do it together." The last barrier between them crumbled, replaced by a profound and mutual respect. Later, as twilight painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Anya walked back to her hangar. The frenetic energy of the upgrades was gone. In its place was a quiet confidence. Her A-10s, now officially designated A-10C Vindicators, sat poised and powerful. Even Elias had made his peace, now arguing with a young technician about the precise calibration of a targeting pod with a grudging, almost paternal pride. Anya climbed the ladder into Hilda's cockpit. It smelled of new electronics and old hydraulic fluid, a perfect fusion of its two lives. The cockpit was a hybrid world. The familiar heavy throttle grip and the worn rudder pedals were now neighbors to the cool, smooth glass of the new displays. She ran her hand over the scarred metal of the canopy rail, feeling the history of the battles it had weathered. Then she traced a line on the glowing screen, feeling the promise of the future. She was no longer an anachronism, a warrior out of time. She had fought for her relevance, and in doing so had redefined it. She had proven that the heart of the Warthog was not its age, but its spirit. a spirit of resilience, of stubborn, unwavering guardianship for those on the ground. She leaned her head back against the seat, looking out through the armored glass at the last fiery sliver of the setting sun. The war was not over. There would be other valleys, other threats, other names etched onto stone plaques. But here in the quiet hum of her reborn machine, Anya Rostova had found a warrior's peace. It was not the absence of conflict, but the calm, unwavering certainty of being ready for the dawn. At its heart, this story is a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit in an age dominated by technology. It suggests that true strength is found not in the sophistication of the machine, but in the courage, instinct, and resilience of the warrior who guides it. It is a narrative built on the belief that respect is not given by rank, but forged in the crucible of action, and that the most meaningful victories are not celebrated with parades, but acknowledged in the silent, knowing glances between those who have shared the burden of the fight. If these themes of honor, grit, and the complex heart of the warrior resonate with you, I warmly invite you to subscribe to the channel for more stories that explore these profound journeys. Thank you for joining me on this flight.